Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline Update for the 7th of January 2024. This is the second part thereof. Please go and check out my first video if you haven't seen it. First video of the day. Anyway, we'll go to military aid and equipment and other aid as well. So first piece of news is Denmark is preparing an aid package for Ukraine worth nearly $1.1 billion. Just a correction, I think it's $1.1 billion worth of stuff. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen announced during a meeting with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, if approved, the package would include ammunition, tanks and drones. This would be another huge Danish package, because I think they've only recently given another massive package to Ukraine. Then Yuri Ignat said that, he commented on the statement about the alleged delay in the transfer of F-16s from Denmark, and someone was saying, yes, sir, you got to be wary here, because the delays are going to be contingent on certain things, and some of those things are actually, good reasons for delay, which is they are fitting the F-16s with longer ranged radars. So if you want the best version of an F-16 you can get, or at least if you want to upgrade that which is being given to Ukraine, so it's really highly capable, then there might have to be delays. So it could be that. But anyway, he said, you shouldn't make catastrophe out of it. We have a gradual plan of action. The pilots are studying, and there were recent statements. We were talking about spring. I don't quite know what that means, whether actually spring is back on the table, or whether those Danish airframes are going to be somewhat delayed, but probably for good reason, right? Talking about Denmark and aid given, and how much certain nations are really contributing to Ukraine at the moment. I'm going to revisit this statistic because actually I've had a few people on my threads saying Europe are really crap, Europe need to pick it up, they're doing a rubbish job, the US are doing an amazing job, or comparatively speaking they're doing an amazing job. Actually, everyone's doing a great job, we need to do more, but let's not denigrate any one side. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway and Denmark are an inspiration, says Michael McKay here. If other democracies put the same effort supporting Ukrainian defenders as these exemplary countries, the Russian fascist invaders would quickly be defeated. Now, this is aid from the 24th of January 2022 to October 2023. So this is still 2 months out of date, and that's 2 months where unfortunately the US aid has kind of ground to a halt. But what's interesting here, again, this is a percentage of GDP. So this is how rich countries are in a very crude kind of sense, how much they're producing on an annual basis, gross domestic product, and as a percentage of how much they produce, what can they give to Ukraine? So it's a sort of way of saying, look, the richer you are, you can give more stuff, but it looks like you're being more generous. But actually, as a percentage of what you could give, it might not be as generous as you might think. So in other words, like, as I keep saying, if you've got a homeless person that has £20 to their name and they give you £10, that's incredible. And yet a billionaire can give you £100,000, and it looks like the billionaire is being way more generous. And they are in real terms. So you've got the real terms figures, 100,000 versus £10. But 50% of their income for the homeless person versus a drop in the ocean, for the multi-billionaire. And so there are different ways of looking at this, and both are important, right? Because on the one hand, the billionaire is being less generous but far more useful. Homeless person is being technically kind of more generous as a percentage, but not as useful, right? It's better to have the billionaire on your side than the homeless person. So there are different ways of cutting this data up. But it is interesting to note that, and the European nations are giving both bilaterally, that's a dark blue here, and a light blue is as a percentage, a percentage of what they give to the EU, then coming back to be added onto their individual kind of bilateral donations. In other words, Lithuania have given 1.4% of their GDP to Ukraine, and 0.4% of their GDP in terms of what they give to the EU that then comes around to be given to Ukraine. right? So you need to add both of those together, which is why Norway doesn't have any of the light blue, because Norway are not a full member of the EU. They're like one of these weird hybrid members. And if you come down here, the UK is not a member of the EU. So we have given 0.4% of GDP, which is as a percentage of what we kind of our wealth generation. It's not as much as these other nations, right? And the US, last time I looked, they were in 30th position as a part of GDP, but I don't know what it is on this infographic here. But you can see the US is down here at 0.3%. Of course, they've given an awful lot of stuff, but they are an incredibly rich country, the richest country in the world, right? So, what could they give, et cetera, et cetera. So the only reason I'm saying this is not to denigrate the US. The US has done an amazing job and are still super important. And in fact, without them going forward, it's going to be really tough. But what I am saying is, if you're going to sit there and slag off Europe, actually, you're technically getting it a bit wrong, because at least on this metric, all of these European nations here are doing a better job than the US. But on the real terms metric, of course, the US is doing better than all those European nations. So we've got to remember the US is 330 million population. The EU is about 448 million. And then you got Norway and UK are not in the EU, but are in kind of Europe at large. But then the US has a larger GDP than, say, the EU. The EU has a real range of countries. So you've got someone like Romania, which sits above the US in terms of a percentage of GDP, but it's a relatively very poor country compared to the US. And so a percentage of their GDP will not be an awful lot of stuff that they're giving, because their GDP will be far lower. So when you look at the whole of Europe and you say Europe needs to do more, well, A, they are doing more in many ways, but B, it's a range of countries, and some of those countries are just very poor and unable to do what you might expect of them. Romania being one, and these are very small nations. Cyprus, if you look at what Cyprus has given as a percentage of GDP, more than the US, but as an island nation, tiny island nation, bilaterally they've given very little, but as a percentage of what they give to percentage of GDP in terms of what they give to the EU, it actually ends up being quite a lot. But they aren't a huge population, right? So we need to be nuanced, and it's very easy to kind of criticize certain countries and let other countries off the hook. And it's useful having a more nuanced approach to this. We just all need to work together. US has done a fabulous job, but it's stalled, and that's a massive worry. The Europeans were arguably slow off the mark, but they were putting things in place. Like the EU doesn't move really dynamically because it's 27 countries and they need to get unanimity and so on and so forth. But actually, since they've started doing more stuff, they've done an awful lot, and a lot of those countries within the EU and within Europe at large have done an awful lot bilaterally as well. What you might look at these countries giving a lot of bilateral support, but then some of these countries, Spain, Austria, Greece, Portugal, Slovenia, Belgium, Hungary, Italy, France, and Romania, especially Italy and France in there, you could actually throw some criticism. Yes, as what you've given to the EU, fair enough, that's impressive. But actually, in terms of what you bilaterally given from your own kind of stocks or from your own off your own back, there could be some great improvement there for those nations. So yeah, there is stuff that we can derive from, conclusions we can derive from that infographic, but it's useful. Right, and of course it's changed in 2 months too. But nations like Germany, where are Germany on here? So they are kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of you going from Lithuania down to, say, the bottom, or down to the US. They are in the middle, but actually since then, in the last 2 months, that bilateral aid would have gone up vastly. So I would assume that Germany would be somewhere up here by now, to be quite honest. Right, going onwards though, Polish foreign ministers urged Europe to respond to Russia's missile attacks on Ukraine by imposing more sanctions on Kremlin's war machine. Also, the EU should supply Kyiv with long-range missiles to target Russian command centers, said Radoslav Sikorsky. Really good rhetoric, really important. It would be great if that could happen. Okay. Right. field hospital, says a dead district, received from the Kingdom of the Netherlands are already being used for the needs of the National Guard. Hospitals are equipped, he said, and with autonomous power supply, can work on a diesel generator and have a water supply and drainage system. They are provided with the necessary supply of medicines and consumables. It's really useful stuff. The Netherlands aren't the only nation that has given these kind of field hospital units. But this is great equipment that's so sorely needed, of course, because when you sort of Casevac people, or medevac people, you need to get them to different staging points before they're taken to, say, a main hospital. And if you can get really decent medical care as close to the front lines as possible, then that's really going to help the survivability of your troops. Right, German aid to Ukraine, who I interviewed the other day. Go and check that out on the live tab on my channel. I interviewed him a couple of days ago, and he mentioned, we talked about Skynex, this new system, that one of them is definitely in Ukraine and one is on its way, but it looks like they probably actually had at least prototypes over there already. He talks about the story of Skynex in Ukraine. What is Skynex? What's happened over time, and what the evidence is that they've actually had Skynex already in Ukraine. It's a great testbed for new weapons, isn't it? Ukraine is an actual war, and you're not going to get better data about how well a weapon gets on than actually using it on the front line, or using it in a war zone. So this is a really useful article. I'm not going to read any of it out to you, but I'm just going to signpost to you that deaidua.org/news. That is German aid to Ukraine's blog, where he updates all the equipment that Ukraine received from Germany. There is a new one on Skynex that is well worth reading. Okay. Quote, we are preparing new lines of cooperation with partners, in particular on drones, to strengthen our capabilities in the use of drones and in countering Russian drones, in strengthening electronic warfare, said Zelensky. And this is super important. That focus on drones and electronic warfare is something that has been ongoing and something that will continue, as there is this arms race between Ukraine and Russia in terms of drone, counter-drone capability, and then counter-drone and counter-drone. And that arms race goes on. They are going to be both sides will be focusing a lot on drone capabilities and counter-drone capabilities. But he's just highlighting that again. We might see some news going forward in terms of what has been achieved in that cooperation with international partners in that regard, and also domestic partners, as there are a lot of drone manufacturers in Ukraine with good technological know-how that are helping to that end. Right, according to CSU leader, so this is the German opposition and Prime Minister of Bavaria, Markus Söder, Germany and the EU would face a veritable security problem if Russia wins the war. The only way is to deliver Taurus missiles to Ukraine and upgrade the Bundeswehr, he said. Wow, okay, this is the kind of rhetoric that those of us who want tourists to go to Ukraine want to hear. And he's not the only one. Former German President Joachim Gauck criticized Olaf Scholz for his hesitation to supply Ukraine with all necessary material, especially the Taurus missile. Quote, we have to help with everything, no exceptions. Those are his words. And again, two politicians, two fairly prominent politicians there, giving their opinion that Taurus need to be given. There is this mounting coalition of voices that are wanting that very important cruise missile to be given to Ukraine. Interesting that Serbian 122 mil shells have been found in the Belgorod region, and that appears to be shells that have been fired from the Ukrainians into the Belgorod region. The production date of the projectiles are April 2023. Also, the projectile has a range of up to 40 kilometers, which is more than in conventional modifications, usually 20 to 25 kilometers, plus or minus 18 kilometer aimed fire. The previous tweet erroneously claimed it was Slovakian, so apologies there, says PS01. Now, this shows that Serbia is, again, kind of talking out both sides of their mouth, a bit like we've seen with Hungary and Slovakia. You've got a political alignment with Russia, but a military industrial complex that is happy to make projectiles and make military equipment and provide them to Ukraine because, money. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff here. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa arrived in Ukraine by train from Poland to reiterate that Japan's support for Ukraine, quote, remains unchanged. Kamikawa also will also meet with Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. So that's good news. She's doing her thing in Ukraine, and Japan, I think, are becoming a more important ally of Ukraine as they recognize what Russia are doing, maybe in the east, with regard to South Korea and North Korea, which is in their sort of geographical sphere of influence, but also in terms of the islands on the north of Japan that the Japanese and the Russians have this long-running argument about. And, they seem to be changing their military strategy, Japan, in terms of moving from a defense force to just an outright kind of regular army, and the way that they, I guess, buy and manufacture weapons and then possibly export weapons. So you might start seeing Japan be more of an exporter going forward. You might see them being more explicit in their support for Ukraine in terms of what they give to Ukraine. Previously, there's been a lot of demining equipment, that kind of, I don't know, but humanitarian style equipment as opposed to outright weaponry, although there's talk about Patriot missiles recently. Okay, Polish government reaches a deal with farmers to suspend border blockade. This is incredibly important. Polish farmers have agreed to suspend their border blockade at their Sieni Medica crossing after reaching an agreement with the government representatives. That was the farmers who had started up the blockade again. It had been sorted out, at least temporarily, and then it started up again, and now that seems to have come to a conclusion. This is really good news. If a sustainable agreement can be reached between the arguing parties here, then this will help Ukraine no end in terms of frictionless movement of goods through the borders, including, indeed, military equipment. Right, and next bit of news in the middle of here that I thought was interesting is Bulgaria has announced the start of a mission with Romania and Turkey to clear the mines of the Black Sea. Now, I had mentioned this before, but now they are starting to do that. It's really good. You've got NATO nations taking an interest in clearing the mines, which will help Ukraine and help their own sort of maritime activities in the Black Sea. So it's not like they are doing that for Ukraine, but obviously that's going to really help in terms of keeping that Black Sea grain corridor safe for the grain exporters and other exporters there. So super useful. Don't know if there's anything else. USA introduced sanctions against a bread factory in Tambov that produces unmanned aerial vehicles for the military. Interesting. Financial Times stating there. It's stated that the bakery produces 250 drones a month. Yeah. Yes. Okay. I think that's all from that lot. Now, it's interesting. I don't know. There appears to be some kind of concerted effort to keep Ukraine in the news here in a good way. A march in support of Ukraine in Berlin. Thank you, Berlin, says Anton Gerashchenko. So a nice, march and lots of Ukrainian flags and whatnot going on. Well, also a march in support of Ukraine is taking place in Cologne, Köln in Germany. Several hundred demonstrators gathered at the railway station and started marching through the streets of the city to Rudolfplatz. They were carrying a 100-meter long Ukrainian flag. Ukraine is Europe. Protect human lives, show solidarity with Ukraine, and no business with murderers are among the slogans. Thank you for supporting Ukraine. So some more support there. And then also in Dublin as well. So Dublin yesterday, there were supporters here giving some love for Ukraine, which is great. Could be the diaspora community there. The Ukraine embassy to Ireland says it was loud on Orwell Road in Dublin. Ukrainians keep reminding the world that Russia is a terrorist state. Obviously not huge, but it's really good to see this kind of activity continue at the time when it's easy to forget about what's going on, considering there's so many things happening in the news around the world, so many hot points, and also domestic issues that people have to contend with. Now, I know you guys will probably go, oh, here he goes again, but this is so super important. Like the next president of the US, leader of the free world, is a super important position. Of course it's super important, and it will have a huge impact on what happens in Ukraine, right? And here, I guess I'll let him speak for himself.
Somebody asked me.
At least I would do if it was making a sound.
Somebody.
Oh dear, where's the sound gone? Oh, sorry, I keep muting my own headphones and I don't know how I do it. There's a shortcut that I accidentally press. When you can't feel your fingers, I'll tell you what, things are so difficult, Anyway, here is the former president of the US and possibly the next president.
Somebody asked me, is President Xi of China now he controls 1.4 billion people ruthlessly, no games, right? They said, is President Xi of China a brilliant man? I said, yes, he is. He's a brilliant man. Next day, Trump said President Xi is brilliant. I said, yeah, I did. They want me to say, no, he's not a very smart guy. He just runs 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. It's crazy.
He's obviously a big fan of dictators, right? And strongmen. Here he is, I think, same speech, is it, about another dictator.
Donald Trump praises the authoritarian Viktor Orban from Hungary. Play this clip.
We have no leadership on our side, but Viktor Orban, most respected man, probably the toughest man in Europe, maybe beyond Europe.
Here, Donald Trump.
So this kind of repeated praising of dictators is not cool. And that's the sort of thing he previously said about Vladimir Putin, although he's calmed down a little bit because he realizes he probably can't get away with saying that. But he said it about all the dictators around the world, Jair Bolsonaro, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, and Viktor Orban. It's really worrying. Now, if he then becomes president of the US, what does that say about foreign policy? What does that say about what will happen in Ukraine? I am deeply worried about that. In fact, I was talking with some other guys when I went to just take my son to rugby now, and 3 other people were saying the same thing about Trump, and that's not even me saying that. So these are opinions going around with other randoms. It is a concern. And talking about Viktor Orban here, the European Council President Charles Michel will probably leave his post early. So I think he's going to run for just an outright MEP, member of European Parliament, I think. If a replacement can't be found quickly, his place will temporarily be taken by Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, whose country will take over the rotating EU Council presidency. My goodness. So you could have Viktor Orban in a position of authority in the EU. That would be really problematic. So yeah, I don't know quite what to think about that, but I do. It's super worrying. So that is the summation of the geopolitical and military aid news of the last 24 hours. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I'm going to be hopefully on Tochny, which is, if we go back